background, I know Althea mentioned my company, Developing Professionals. I've been doing training and development, OD, organizational development, coaching and consulting to organizations for the last 16 years now. However, before that, I worked for UPS, and I was a communications training and development manager there. And after September 11th hit, I was actually the one who wrote a crisis management plan domestically and internationally. So I've got some rich information that I'm going to share with you that's not only going to help you navigate COVID-19, but any critical incidents that you may have to deal with now and in the future. I hope each of you have printed out a copy of the workbook that has some handouts that I will reference for you. I'm going to give you a lot of information. I do not share my PowerPoint deck. So for each one of the sections in your workbook, I've got some areas that you can take notes at the bottom. So you'll have the info you need to go back and take it to your workplace. So let's get started. So Jenna, if you want to please advance the next slide. So let's take it our new leadership normal. The outbreak of COVID-19 is a crisis that very few people saw coming. The quick spread of the disease has completely disrupted the world as we know it. As leaders, the new normal includes working from home, dealing with disrupted supply chains, financial uncertainty, applying for new government programs, compliance with new federal and state mandates, managing sick workers, and laying off staff. So Jenny, you want to flip to the next slide for me, please? So uncertainty of tomorrow is the only thing that leaders are certain of these days. Crisis management is the new strategic plan, navigating through 3 phases of mobilizing, stabilizing, and strategizing. Currently, leaders are in the mobilization wave, securing the safety of the workplace and establishing a response structure. In order to move through the next 2 phases effectively, leaders must start planning and preparing for the new normal, whatever that's going to look like. Most businesses have mobilized their crisis plans if they had them, or quickly put something together if they didn't. But what comes next? In this environment, leaders will have to make some serious, tough decisions. The actions they take now must be tactical, but they also should be aligned with the company's mission and purpose. So what are we going to cover here today? Jen, if you want to flip to the next slide for me, please. Many actions taking over the 3 phases of COVID-19 crisis management will evolve over time. However, the leadership team in your organization should be focused on some critical areas. To help manage the current situation and prepare for what comes next, leaders should create separate plans and areas of responsibilities for these 6 key areas: business impact, customer relations, financial management, operations management, health and safety protocols, and human resources management. And today what I'm going to do is I'll show you how to conduct a business continuity assessment in each of these key areas. So let's take a look at first at business impact. So if we want to slip, thanks, Jenna. So let's start with business impact. Gallup Managing Director Larry Eman gathered the strategies and policies of 100 members of their CHRO roundtable, which are business leaders, an organization that includes the CHROs of more than 650 of the world's largest companies for the responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. The companies in this sampling averaged $27 billion in revenue with 80,000 employees, and most of these organizations are global companies. Eman found that crisis management teams are currently in place to mitigate this crisis. Additional meetings are being held to monitor business impact in efforts to protect or sustain business functions. As leaders, you should have a team or committee in place that is currently assessing what areas of your pre-COVID-19 business model is impacted. This information will assist in directing your attention to the areas where you will need a new strategic direction. So overall, these leaders evaluated the business impact of response to COVID-19 and how it applies to the optimal number of non-essential employees in the workforce, a new definition of what is business critical roles and functions, employee skills and adaptability to reskilling, IT department expansions, changing to full or part-time remote work, limiting the number of workers in the office at a time and their proximity to each other. And in addition, looking at hiring a company medical director to be an in-house expert, carrying some cost-saving measures forward to remain more efficient in the future, decreasing travel in the future, especially for internal meetings, expanding new business functions such as L&D that have risen out of need, making new employee morale and engagement programs, well-being programs, apps, informal meetings, and social networking permanent, analyzing lessons learned about agility that can be applied to future decisions. So when looking at their overview, this session is going to identify and focus on key areas for your business continuity plan and assessment. So let's take a look at business impact. For overall business impact, take a holistic view of your business department or function. Some of the new realities will include health and safety equipment to protect workers from COVID-19 and types of testing you may need to conduct on a regular basis. So identify what additional monies you will need in your budget for supplies. Next, you have to analyze and forecast what parts of your market served have been positively or negatively impacted. For your supply chain, you have to evaluate what suppliers are going to be able to continue to provide products and services and where new supplies are going to be needed. Also evaluate any shortages or delays that also may occur. For your business operations, identify what areas have been impacted and what will need to change for moving forward. And lastly, what do you anticipate your new staffing levels to look like? If you laid off or furloughed individuals, what positions will you need to bring back? What positions may need to be eliminated? And will you be able to get enough talent to return to work? There may be other areas you may want to add to this list, but the focus here is to do an assessment of all the areas that are shaping a new normal consideration for your specific organization. So now that we took a look at business impact, let's look at our second section, which is on customer relations. So let's look at your customer demographic. Relationships are all based on human connections. Your business relationship with your customers, whether you're a B2C or a B2B provider, is built over time. This crisis has separated you from these people and who, like you, are craving comfort, connection, and assurance. Your focus right now is not how I can gain market share, but rather how can I support my customers in a meaningful and helpful way. What customers cared about in the past might be changing. The impact of your actions today will define the loyalty people have for your brand and your product. So some of the areas to consider right now in your customer relations business continuity model include communications. What information should you be sending to your customers right now? Share what changes have been made to your business model and/or what changes you anticipate in the future. Marketing, if you've changed your product or service offering, who is now your targeted demographic? Your marketing plan may need to totally shift. New processes. Identify what changes will need to be made on how customers purchase or use your products or services based on social distancing and sanitary guidelines. And I have to tell you, as a trainer, this is what I do for a living, and a majority of my training is classroom-led training. That was totally wiped out after COVID-19. So as you can see, what we're even doing now is when we have to provide any type of training, any type of learning, any type of meetings, we're actually moving to a Zoom platform, a WebEx type of platform. So once again, what are your new processes? How are you now delivering your services? And then the other thing is you want to take a pulse survey. What has changed for your customers? I'm encouraging people to send out a brief questionnaire, around 5 questions, to determine what their expectations are, what they need from you, and how have they been impacted. And I have some examples of questions you could use for your pulse survey in the supplemental workbook that I have provided. Right now we're on page 3 and 4 in your participant workbook, but in page 7, I actually have a list of questions. And Jenna, if you flip to the next slide, the 4 key areas that you want to take a look at when you identify your pulse survey questions for your customers is, what can our organization do better to serve your needs? What are your expectations, needs for communicating with you during COVID-19? What would you like to see us keep and or stop doing? What is the one thing that we can do better that would help us serve you more effectively in the future? And what do you anticipate needing for the future? Number 2, another section to take a look at, identify 1 or 2 key questions. How satisfied are you with our products and services? How has us being shut down impacted you if you have been shut down and you're a non-essential service provider at this point. What is the one thing that makes you most happy about our business? What changes, if any, would you like to see within our business due to COVID-19 outbreak? And number 3, what value do we provide? What is the main benefit you receive from our product and or service? What value do we provide that makes you decide to stay with us? And then what are your biggest challenges? What obstacles, if any, will you be facing once we reopen? And then where is the one area that you will need the most help from us in the future? So I encourage you to take through those, taking a look at your customer demographics, who was your customers in the past, who are your current customers, and who you anticipate to be in the future, and kind of get a pulse from where they're at so you can also determine what you need to do to shift for this new normal. All right, so I told you I would open it up for any questions after I go through 2 sections. So I'm just gonna check in to see if we have any questions that came through.
Nope, we don't have any at the moment, so we can continue on.
Okay, excellent. So I must be doing a good job providing good information. All right, so now let's take a look at the 3rd section, operations management. And I don't know all the businesses or organizations that are out there, so I had to keep this really generic because we're all at a different industry, a different type of place. But when it comes to managing your operations, COVID-19 has forced us to change our normal routines. Each business is unique, so every leader will need to assess what has dramatically changed in their business operations. However, regardless of your industry, there are some common factors that all organizations have experienced in the light of this crisis. These will need to be carefully considered when it comes to leading people. So number 1, what are your communications processes? What will now be required for the frequency and delivery methods for meetings? Will Zoom or WebEx be the new standard? What do you need in regard to employee portals or systems where employees can access information and resources from any location where they may be working? Number 2, equipment and operating systems. What type of equipment do you need to have in place to protect your workers and customers? Do you have to change hours or have staggered shifts to minimize the contact among people? And number 3, IT department expansion. Do you have enough IT staff for managing the business and supporting troubleshooting for staff working remotely? What will be needed for the future? And 4, technology needs. Did you have all the appropriate equipment and technology capacity to adjust to staff working remotely? So those are just some basic overall things to consider when it comes to operations management. So now let's take a look at financial management. Now, I don't think any business has been spared financial woes from this pandemic, but depending upon your leadership role, you may not have the responsibility for the financial forecasting for your business. However, you should be aware of the financial implications. Some of the areas to consider in your business continuity assessment are: 1, cash flow forecasts. Cash is king. Without cash, nothing else matters. So what does this look like for the next few months? The rest of the year, you should have at least a 12-week rolling cash flow. Forecast projections. What was your 2020 budget before COVID-19? And what does your budget look like now after COVID-19? This should be projections with a P&L spreadsheet, which allow for different scenarios. For example, decrease in sales with different percentages to see how it affects the bottom line and your break-even point. Payroll adjustments. What changes in staffing levels or changes to salary wages? And then what payroll changes need to be made? And then inventory management. What supplies do you have? What will you need to order or not order? And last but not least, working capital. What does it now look like with the cash flow forecasting and P&L scenario forecasting? This should provide at least a realistic understanding of the working capital that you may have. So just some high-level overview: operations management, financial management. Don't do a deep dive in this, but want to make sure that you're aware of what you're doing to manage those two key critical areas. And I just want to do a check-in to see if any questions have come in.
Nope, no questions at the moment.
All right, yeah, and I anticipate the last couple of sections is where we're going to really have more questions based on the content for today. So now let's take a look at health and safety protocols. Next, the health and well-being of all employees is mission critical. Employees will need to change and adapt to new policies, processes, and systems as a result of COVID-19. But they also need to feel safe. That is their number one concern, whether they are currently working for your organization, being called back after a layoff, or a new hire that you're going to possibly hire for your company. So some of the mitigation efforts for health and safety protocols should include, are you going to close any on-site facilities to make sure you're doing the 6 feet distancing, right? Such as if you have gyms on site, cafeterias, any common areas. COVID-19 screening. What type of on-site health screening will be needed? Will temperature readings be taken daily before employees start work? Will you have a visitor and employee self-screening form that individuals complete before entering your building? Equipment and supplies. What new equipment needs to be purchased to protect your employees? Face masks, plastic shields, hand sanitizers, rubber gloves, surface wipes. Maintenance and cleaning schedule. What common services are all of your employees touching? What needs to be sanitized on a regular basis? Will employees be required to sanitize workspaces throughout their day? What are the new procedures and job tasks for cleaning of your maintenance staff if you have any? And then take a look at reconfiguring your office space. In looking at your physical office space, what areas need to be changed so employees aren't sitting next to one another? This includes meeting rooms, offices, and cubicles. Safe distancing protocols. What new policies do you need to implement to ensure employees are abiding by social distancing guidelines? In the next section, I'm going to review having an infectious control policy that will cover some of these standards. And I have to believe before COVID-19, no HR department possibly had an infectious control policy in place. So this is definitely one that you're going to want to make sure that you have within your organizations and employees know what it looks like for your organization. So now let's take a look at our last section, which I'll probably spend a little bit of time on this, is human resources management. This is a critical area. So if Jenna can flip to the next slide for me, please. So now let's review human resources protocols. Let's first look at your staffing. If you've laid off and furloughed employees, what's the process for returning employees to work? Be prepared that some may not want to return to work out of fear, or they would prefer being on unemployment, collecting the additional $600 a week that is now being offered through the PUA, which is the Pandemic Unemployment Assurance Policy. So that's only lasting through July 31st, by the way. The other thing is return to work schedules. What hours will individuals be working if they're exempt or non-exempt? Do you need to change shift times to accommodate social distancing guidelines or new operational needs? New staffing levels. Because of new efficiencies that may have been created during this time, decreases in workload or increases in workload, what does your new organizational chart need to look like? And then last but not least, under staffing, under HR, your interviewing and selection process. If you need to hire new employees, will you be screening applicants for COVID-19 just before the interview? And after a conditional offer is made, will you require a pre-employment medical exam, which you can require? And if you make a conditional offer to an employee and you have a pre-employment medical exam and they are tested for COVID-19, you can actually take away that job offer with no legal ramifications. Now let's take a look at HR, performance management. So what do your training plans look like? What does the return to work training plans look like? What new health and safety training must all employees go through? This includes current employees working and onboarding returning laid off employees or new hires. And also too, if you're going to be bringing employees back, even though if you furloughed or laid them off, make sure you do all the required HR processing with them again. You know, the DMV, the I-9, make sure you do all those forms upon returning them to work. Things may have happened while they were out at work, and it'll be good to have updated information on all of those employees. Cross-training for teams. I have to believe individuals have had to shift what they're doing, taking over new and additional responsibilities. So as staffing levels change dramatically during this pandemic, individuals were required to take on different tasks. So what cross-training plans need to be implemented in the future, as there will be increased employee absences due to COVID-19 and the anticipated pandemic wave seasons. Number 3, delivering methods for training, as I mentioned previously. For all current training needs, onboarding new hires, job methods, safety and compliance, and skill behavioral competencies training. How will this training now be delivered? Will you need to convert all of your classroom-led training to web-based platforms? Or will you reduce the class sizes if offered under the traditional CLT methods? Updating job descriptions. Can't say enough about this one. With change in job tasks and responsibilities, reduction in staff, and increased efficiencies now demonstrated possibly, what do you need to change or create so all of your job descriptions are accurate and now current? And if by chance you've laid off and furloughed people once again, I want to make sure that when you're bringing them back, you complete all the HR processing, all the essential forms, but also make sure every single employee now has a new and updated job description so they know what their duties are. And then also too, what training you need to do to make sure that they're on board, especially if you have any new safety protocols that you're putting in place. And then also updating your employee handbooks. With any policy and benefit changes, I'm working with a lot of organizations right now, helping them with some of their policies. The employee handbook will need to be updated and then redistributed to all employees. What I would encourage you to do is your HR department, if you're a leader responsible for this, any of the updated policies that you'll put in place, you need to make sure that they have a copy of the individual policy or put it as part of your employee handbook and redistribute the entire employee handbook to all employees. So let's take a look at some of these policies that you probably don't currently have or you're going to need to adapt and shift. So some of the new policies that you'll need to consider adding or changing your employee handbook is a new infectious disease control policy. This policy will cover information about the nature and spread of infectious diseases as well as steps required to prevent outbreaks. And if you take a look at page 8 and 10 in your participant workbook, I have a sample policy. And so if you want to just turn to that, I'm a member of SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management. They have been fabulous providing updated information for business leaders on what you need to do to deal with COVID-19. And in your workbook, I have a copy of a policy that you can take a look at and you can modify it and adapt it to your needs. Takes a look at your telecommuting policy, staying home while ill, requests for medical information and documentation, confidentiality of medical information. And by the way, as a sidebar, if some of your employees test for COVID-19, that is an OSHA reportable injury, by the way. Also, social distancing guidelines for workplace infectious disease outbreaks. And also during the day, employees are requested to do certain things. And then also, what is your policy for outside activities? So with that sample policy in your workbook, I would encourage you to take a look at it. And if you're not responsible for it, make sure whoever is within your organization that you're implementing this as soon as possible. The other thing we want to take a look at is the new FMLA leave expansion emergency paid sick leave that went into effect on April 1st. I don't know if you're all aware of this. I just printed out the new 10-page document on some of the changes and how it's going to impact in the organization. Basically, in a nutshell, it expands who is covered, reason for leave, and rate of pay employees can receive. A couple of things that I want to point out, though, that are significant changes for organizations. One, they changed the definition of employee. The definition changed to anyone who has been employed by an employer for at least 30 days are now covered under this FMLA policy. Number two, employer, the definition has changed from 50 or more employees to fewer than 500 employees. So all of you, if you're between like 4 and 50 employees, this policy now covers all of your employees. Part of it is an emergency paid sick leave section, which entitles individuals for conditions of COVID-19, they are entitled to 80 hours of paid leave. So I do not have a copy of this policy in your workbook, but if any of you want a copy of the new policy that came out in information, it's a 10-page document. I would be more than happy to send that to Althea and Jen and the team there, and they can make sure that you get a copy of that. So make sure you're aware of that. Also, too, for benefits offerings, what changes are being made? Increase or decrease in pay scales, impact to bonuses, reduced benefits or additional benefits such as reimbursement for childcare needs, or covering any COVID-19 expenses. So what does your health and welfare package look like in the past? What does it look like now? What is it going to look like in the future? Make sure in your policy you're making any of those changes, and all of your employees know what those changes are. Okay. Jen, if you want to flip to the next slide, a couple other policies I want to talk to you about. Other policies to also consider: working remotely. This is the new normal, right? This is definitely an area where our business communities will see continuous future growth. If you had a working remote policy, what needs to be revised? If you didn't have one and you now have people working remotely, this policy is your #1 priority for getting in place. Will you be limiting travel? If employees were required to travel together for meetings and conferences to save costs, does this need to change? I know we talk about dress code. I'm now framing it appearance code. Since working from home for a majority of non-essential business professionals, business attire is out and loungewear is in. So when people start returning to work, what will be the required business standard? In addition, if you are requiring masks or any type of safety garments, make sure this is reflected in your policy. All right, so what did I cover today? I provided you with information to help you conduct a business continuity assessment under the areas of business impact, customer relations, financial management, operations management, health and safety protocols, human resources management. Now, I know this is a lot to manage, and everything these days can feel quite overwhelming at times, but my best advice to you is take it just one day at a time and just do the next best thing for you, your employees, and your organization. I have one last section, to give you some best practices to close today's program. However, now I want to open it up for what questions you have about anything that I covered in the last 2 sections, which I know was a lot of ground to cover.
We do have a couple questions, Lori. Yeah, I'm laughing about the dress, the dress code. It's funny. It's like, what sweatpants should we put on today, right?
Exactly.
We actually just finished rewriting. I just finished rewriting my handbook and employee manual today. So one of the questions from the audience is, what do you see as potential changes to communication with working from home? For example, people are answering emails at 6 a.m. and midnight. How has work-life balance been shifted?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually created a handout, and I did a mini session on managing a remote workforce, which I will definitely make this available also to anybody out there. So to answer your question, I think as an organization and employer, this work-life balance is thrown out the window. People are working at home, they have possibly kids at home, they have spouses at home, and employers are requiring them to be working around the clock. You can't do that anymore. You have to set some specific standards. The normal workday has shifted. People are at their workstation at 8:30, 9 o'clock, whenever they start, and closing off at 5 o'clock. You have to make accommodations for your employees based on what they're dealing with at home. So instead of doing an 8 o'clock meeting, if you have an individual that has 2 children at home, and if they're working a 40-hour work week, talk with them and say, okay, when are you going to be working? When are you taking care of child issues? And then make some accommodations. I was just doing coaching with an individual the other day that was at her wit's end. She goes, I can't do this anymore. It's just wearing me so thin. And I recommended creating a new plan for herself. If you're working a 40-hour work week, you're part-time, you have to chunk out your day. These hours I'm actually going to be spending in the office. These hours I'm actually going to be doing my homeschooling with my child. This half hour I'm taking out for myself for a mental health break, and then communicating that with your manager. We're all under a lot of stress, so we have to make sure we put together a work-life balance plan that's going to work for us, and there's clear expectations as far as what we can expect from our employee and expect from our boss. So that communication is critical. So if you are leaders out there and you have employees working with you or for you, you need to make sure that you have open communications and a dialogue as far as what they need. Because I think the next wave that we're going to be seeing is health and wellness is going to be the next critical incident as far as what we're going to navigate, because people are feeling a little bit overwhelmed by this COVID-19.
Thank you, Lori. That's really good advice. That's a great response. The next question from the audience, if someone refuses to return based on safety concerns, will they be denied unemployment, and can they refuse to return is a question I want to add in there.
Yeah, so let me I will do a little bit of a deeper dive here because I've been responding to a lot of questions with that. So let me just start with how the unemployment insurance process works. So if you've laid off or furloughed an employee for various reasons because of COVID-19, an employee then can go ahead and apply for unemployment. Currently, unemployment lasts for 29 weeks. With this PUA under this CARE Act, they've added on an additional 13 weeks, which is a total of 39 weeks an individual can claim unemployment in a calendar year. The minimum is 104, the maximum is 504 that an individual can receive on a weekly basis. And typically, to factor that in, it's about 50% of what employee currently is making. So what had happened is Congress passed this CARES Act, and underneath that, with this PUA, they decided that every individual will receive $600 additional pay in a separate account if they have direct deposit, a separate check through July 31st. So now you could have an individual sitting at home making more money than returning to work. The reason that Congress put this into place is because during COVID-19, they want to make sure people are socially distancing themselves and also abiding by that stay-at-home order. So they're encouraging people to stay at home. So that's one part, but that will run out July 31st. I don't know if they're going to extend it. Who knows what Congress will do. I factored, so if an individual is staying at home, outside of that $600, the most a person is going to make this year is like $19,600 on unemployment, and that's at the $504 max. That's how unemployment works. If you as an employer, if by chance an employee has quit, you can contest unemployment. And then it's up to the Department of Labor to see if it's just cause. If an employee quits, I hope I said that right. So if you terminated or laid off an employee, they actually can file an unemployment claim. You can deny that claim if you actually terminated an employee, a bad performing employee that caused you undue hardship. You can actually reject that claim, and it'll be up to the Department of Labor to determine if they're going to reject it. Many times, the Department of Labor will side on the employee. If an employee quits, they are not eligible for unemployment. So that's a high-level overview on how unemployment works. Now let's take a look at these furloughed and laid off employees. If by chance you have individuals that you want to return to work and they refuse to come back to work, you can, how do I say this? You can't force them to come back to work, and if they refuse to come back to work, then they have quit, you can't force them to come back to work. They can still stay on unemployment. They're no longer an employee. However, that money will run out. My fear, though, with this, if by chance you have a current employee that doesn't want to come to work because they fear going to work, you can require them to come to work. It's not a legitimate reason. If by chance that they do not want to come to work, then they quit, and they are not eligible then for unemployment. Organizations, if you furloughed and laid off employees, until this $600 actually is gone, I think it's going to be very hard for you to get somebody to come back into your workplace. The key, though, is the people that want to work, they're going to be the ones that are going to have gainful employment. We're not going to have the amount of jobs that we had pre-COVID-19. So eventually all of this unemployment is going to run out for individuals, and there may not be jobs that they can go into. So I wanted to give you enough information. Hopefully I explained that clearly to all of you. I know it seems a little bit complicated, but that's really what we're dealing with right now. And if you have an employee, like I said, that is fearing coming to work, you want to make some accommodations if you can. If you take a look at the FMLA, the new act that came out with that emergency act, if by chance they're taking care of children at home, If by chance they have maybe a sick elderly parent that they're taking care of, under that new act, if anybody is impacted by COVID-19 under, I think there's 8 different criteria, they will be eligible for FMLA leave for up to 80 hours. So you want to make accommodations for your employees. If they're good employees, they can maybe take PTO. You can also offer, if they want to be out of work for a period of time, a non-paid. So if it's that fear factor, work with them what you can with the resources that you have available.
So speaking on the FMLA, there's a couple questions for that. So one of the questions is, under the new FMLA policy, is the paid leave of 80 hours in addition to PTO given by the company?
I'm sorry, you broke up, Althea. What was the thing about the PTO?
Under the FMLA policy, is the paid leave of 80 hours in addition to the PTO given by the company? Or is it one?
Oh, yes. No, it's in addition to.
It's addition, okay. And then sticking on the FMLA, is it better to update, say, the FMLA policy as a standalone document and not put it within the handbook, as this is a temporary change to the policy until it maybe becomes a permanent change with with FMLA?
That's a great question. So the actual FMLA leave expansion emergency paid sick leave policy that was it was implemented April 1st. This policy will be in effect until December 31st, 2020. So it's in addition to that FMLA leave policy. So that is a great question. What I would do is give the additional one to your employees as a separate standalone. And then if by chance something permanently changes, then you can update the other FMLA policy in your employee handbook. Great question.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you. Another question from the audience. Has the Department of Labor adjusted their thinking on the overtime eligible employees with regards to recording and monitoring their hours?
Oh, I don't have that answer. I wouldn't know that.
Okay, thank you. Another question, this is a question from me. What if we have an HR, we outsource our HR, so you know, we feel it's an important part, but it's not something we need to have a full staff member. It's extremely helpful, especially at this time. What if you don't have an HR, you don't outsource your HR, you don't have an HR department within your company? What are some resources that companies or smaller organizations can do to take the steps that you've lined out here today?
Yeah, so a couple things you can do. One, for me, I'm of course an HR practitioner. I can't say how important having a qualified and competent HR person on your team is. Couple things you can do. One, if you don't have the resources to hire an HR person or your company isn't that big, I would definitely make sure that someone within your organization has basic competencies in that area and have them belong to SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resources Management. It's such a great investment. I think my annual membership is like $300. I have great resources that I can pull from. And then also there's the local chapter, the Buffalo Niagara Human Resources Association. So that would be one. Number two, if you have an employment agency that you work with, you know, or a payroll company, sometimes they have additional services under the HR umbrella that you can actually tap into. And then thirdly, the third option would be, you know what, if you have specific needs that are short-term gap needs, hire an HR consultant. They come in, they can help you with your employee handbook, they can help you with the performance management system. I know for a lot of my small and medium-sized companies that I work with, they don't have a designated HR person. So when I come in and do training with them, they also hire me possibly as a consultant. And I'm not pushing my services by any means, but if you have someone that you're utilizing as a consultant in one area, bring in someone for a short-term period of time that has the expertise that can help you in some of these key areas. I know a comment came in, I think, Althea, they were referencing maybe Lolly and some companies.
Yep. So Lolly is offering resources to the community for COVID-related issues. And I'm sure there's a lot of insurance agencies and insurance companies and also HR. We use Employee Service Corp. I'm sure these are temporary solutions that people can find as well. So another question, you know, this has been coming up a lot just to, wait, another question from the audience. I'm gonna ask that one first. Okay. You know that that with new hires, you can have a COVID-19 testing required prior to hire. Can an employer require this of all existing employees and or returning remote employees back on site?
Yes, absolutely. From the Bonadino Group, they're a CPA consultant group. They've been providing great information. So actually, you can require for individuals coming to work. I'm going to read a couple things here. So, how much information may an employer request from an employee who calls in sick in order to protect the rest of its workforce during the COVID pandemic? During the pandemic, ADA-covered employees may ask such questions if they experience symptoms of the pandemic virus. For COVID-19, these symptoms include fever, chills, cough, shortness of breath, or sore throat. Employers must maintain all health-related information as confidential. So you can require that, and if they show any signs or symptoms, you can actually require them to be quarantined for the 14 days. When may an ADA-covered employee take the body temperature of employees during the COVID-19 pandemic? Generally, measuring an employee's body temperature is a medical examination. Because the CDC and state local health authorities have acknowledged community spread of COVID-19 and issued attendant precautions, employers may measure employees' body temperatures. However, employees should be aware that some people with COVID-19 do not have a fever. I know some of the companies that I'm working with right now, we were talking the other day, we were doing a group coaching session, what are best practices for this. So some organizations, every day for an employee when they come to work, they actually have a health screener, and every person has to actually have their temperature taken before they actually enter the building, and that is recorded. You can also require that too of any of your vendors or customers that come on site. And then if an employer is hiring, may it screen applicants for symptoms? Yes. An employer may screen job applicants for symptoms of COVID-19 after making conditional job offer, as long as it does so for all entering employees of the same job. And then I mentioned too that you can require them to take a pre-employment medical exam after a conditional employment offer is made. And if by chance they show signs of COVID-19, you can rescind the offer or delay the start date. So did it answer your question?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that, I think so.
Okay.
So if not, Jess, she'll get back to me on this one. So the other question I was going to ask you is hiring. So there are companies that are hiring, and
Yep.
just a very interesting time to be doing hiring.
Yep.
Do you have any tips for virtual? I mean, it's obviously we're not going to be doing a lot of in-person interviews. So
Yep.
do you have any tips for folks if they are able to be hiring, what to look for in a virtual interview, like from an HR perspective? Or any, you can think of any tips to give them?
Yeah, that's a great great question. So yeah, we're moving away from this face-to-face interviewing. So what I would do if you're going to be doing like a Zoom or a WebEx or whatever platform you support when you're doing the interview, just like you do face-to-face. I mean, you're seeing the other person on the screen. A couple of things in addition to your regular stuff. You have your skill-based interview questions. You know, do they have the skills, the abilities, and the talents to do the job? So you do those questions, right? The other part is, of course, behavioral-based questions. You know, having specific situations that you throw out there that will demonstrate how they react and respond from a previous situation or anticipating how they're going to react in the future. The other thing that you want to pay attention to, though, since it's face-to-face virtual, is really take a look at their nonverbal communication. You know, seeing how they're reacting to you. Seeing if they're familiar and comfortable even using the application. You know, definitely as we move forward with, you know, virtual as part of our everyday living, one of the things you're going to really have to see is how comfortable a person is actually working in this new virtual platform. So those are some of the things that I think I would pay attention to. It's not going to be that much different than a face-to-face. We're really paying attention to the nonverbal and how comfortable they are working in a virtual platform. That I think is going to be the additional thing that you're going to have to take in consideration.
One other question regarding, you mentioned before about some of the folks that are right now maybe making more money staying home, and a lot of employers, or some of them are, you know, getting asked if they could get laid off, not
Yep.
understanding that this is a 39-week situation, that it's not going to last forever. What is your recommendation to employers that are hiring to try to find out, were they one of those folks that decided to go down that road? Because it really shows a work ethic or lack of a work ethic. you know, what are some of the things that you can, you know, if people are hiring that they could look for or watch for, or how can they appropriately ask those questions without um, being inappropriate?
Yeah, well, I think the point of the question is if organizations are currently hiring, and I know now, like there's I can't remember the number, how many, 31 million or something. I'm so bad with numbers that are claiming unemployment. So there's a lot of people that are unemployed out there. Some people don't want to be unemployed. They want to get back to work. So I think if you actually have an opening, and if you have laid off people and they don't want to come back, well, that's a testament to a work ethic. Then, you know, move past them. If people are happier sitting at home than going to work and making a difference and making a living, are those the people you really want working for your organization? But there's so many people out there like, I cannot wait to get back to work. My brother is one of them. He's like, I can't wait to get back to work. And so what I think you need to do is through your recruiting sources, there's a lot of people out there, they're unemployed. Utilize all your recruiting sources, utilize all your social media. And those people that want to come back to work are going to take advantage of those opportunities. So I can't say enough about, there's people out there that want to work, and the people that rather sit home collecting unemployment, those are people you really don't want working for your organization to begin with.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, you know, unfortunately, this is not going to last forever, and we are going to be back to normal, but the jobs are not going to be the same as they were. And it's unfortunate. So, so do you have, and I think we don't have any other questions. Hold on. Okay. So no, I think there was just a little bit more explanation on the new hire piece of testing that yes, you can test the new hires.
Yes, you can.
Can you, the ones that have been working remotely, can they, I don't want to say the word force, but make sure that they get a test before returning on site?
Absolutely. And you should be doing that.
Okay. All right. That's good. Okay. Any final thoughts, Lori? Because we're just about out of time and there's no more questions from the audience.
Yeah. Jenna, if you want to turn to the last slide. So I want to thank everyone. Hopefully I answered all your questions. Of course, me as a trainer, I'm also trying to navigate delivering training and information, being this platform. I know that Althea and Jenna has my information, and also on the workbook. If you have any questions or anything that I wasn't totally clear on or you didn't ask, feel free to send me an email. I'm here to help us. We're all in this together. So anything that you need, reach out for me anytime. And I truly mean that. But I want to close on something. I've been doing a lot of research and, of course, making sure that I'm up to speed with what's going on in our world. And in closing, I want to share an article that I recently read called How to Manage Strategy During a Crisis, 5 Lessons, written by Laura Chandler. She's a business director, and she's also an animal rescuer. And this is what she wrote. August 29, 2005. I remember it well. This is the date that Hurricane Katrina made landfall on the Gulf Coast. It had been a particularly active hurricane season. Having up in Mobile, Alabama, and I'm sure those across the Gulf Coast would agree, hurricane preparation is a way of life. The season, however, seemed different. Because of the high activity, there was some fatigue. So when Katrina began threatening the coast, many of us were just over it. Nonetheless, we took the necessary precautions and braced ourselves. Where are we today with the COVID-19 pandemic? Conjures up similar emotions. Take precautions and brace ourselves. And although the two crises are very different, lessons many of us learned in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina can be applied even today. Number 1, recovery needs a roadmap, which is best designed by many. Number 2, there is power and hope in a clear strategic framework. 3, don't hesitate to ask for help from the experts. Number 4, sometimes all you can do is make the next best decision. And number 5, quality leadership can make or break recovery. So I truly wish you all the best success. God bless all of you. I hope you stay safe and healthy. And hopefully you found today's information beneficial for you.